Hi, this is Baltimore GS from GSTwins.com. Today we're going to go over to check the valve clearance on a 2007 GS500F using the Suzuki factory service manual method. First we're going to start by removing the side fairings. With the fairings removed, we can now access the engine. Next, remove the seat. With the seat removed, we can access the two 12mm bolts that hold on the gas tank. With the bolts removed, lift up on the gas tank slightly to access the fuel tank petcock. You want to turn it either direction to the side to turn it off. Remove the bolts securing the frame petcock. On this bike we only have one bolt. Remove the two fuel lines running to the gas tank. Fuel will leak out when you remove the lines. Remove the spring clamps from the line so they don't get caught when you pull the gas tank out. Feed the fuel lines through the frame. And carefully lift up on the gas tank so you can access the vent hose. And you can lift your gas tank off. If your bike's equipped with a pair system, remove all the components so you can access the cylinder head. Remove any cable ties. Remove the hose going from the breather to the air box. This bike has a K&N lunchbox, so there is no air box to speak of. Use an 18mm socket to remove the two spark plugs. That'll make the engine easier to turn. With the pair system out of the way, we can now access the breather on top of the cylinder head cover. Remove the four 10mm bolts. With our four bolts removed, gently pry up on the breather cover, being careful not to damage the gasket. If you tear the gasket, you will need to replace it. Remove the six 6mm bolts securing the cylinder head cover. With the bolts removed, gently pry up on the cylinder head cover, being careful not to damage the gasket. Once the gasket's free all the way around, work the cylinder head cover up out of the frame. Inspect the gasket and the cylinder head cover. If it's still soft and pliable, it's okay to be reused. If it's brittle and cracking, go ahead and replace it. Remove the three 7mm bolts securing the side cover. We want to align our RT mark here with our pickup. On the older GS models there are two pickups. On the 04 up models you only have a single pickup. Make sure you turn the engine in a clockwise direction. With the RT mark on our crank lined up with the pickup, you'll see there are two camshaft notches here facing away from each other. We want to turn the crank another 180 degrees and line up the RT mark again with the cams notches facing towards each other. Before we check our valve clearance, let's explain why we're doing this. Right here is our valve and our camshaft As the camshaft spins, it pushes down on our valve, which opens and closes to allow gasoline and exhaust in and out of the engine. There needs to be a little bit of distance between the top of this valve and the camshaft so the valve's able to close completely. If this distance gets too tight, the valve hangs open and the engine won't have compression, or in worst case will end up burning a valve. So as the valve wears, it's going to make this distance smaller, and you change the shims to compensate. With the RT mark on our crank lined up with the pickup and the two cam notches facing towards each other, we can take measurements on our right exhaust valve, our right intake valve, and our left intake valve. The specified clearance is 0.03 to 0.08 millimeters. A lot of people run the exhaust a little bit looser because these bikes tend to burn valves, so you can run them at 0.10 if you'd like. We'll start out with the Vegas feeler here, which is a 0.076 millimeter. The feeler should slide under the camshaft and just have slight resistance. Mine's not going under at all on any of them. So we're going under our next size, which in my kit's a 0.051 millimeter. And that does not fit. Doesn't fit. And doesn't fit. And then we're down to our smallest size, which in my kit is a 0.038 millimeter. Which does not fit into the right exhaust. It does fit into the right intake. And does not fit into the left intake. So all three of these valves can use adjusting. You want to write down your measurements, and we'll be using them later to calculate what size shims we need to replace. Rotate the crankshaft 180 degrees and line up the RT marks again with the camshaft notches facing away from each other to check the clearance on the left exhaust valve. With the RT mark on the crank lined up with the pickup and our two camshaft notches facing away from each other, we can check the clearance on our left-hand exhaust valve. So we'll start out with our biggest, which is 0.076 millimeters in my kit, which does actually fit okay. Now let's see how big the gap actually is. We'll go to the next size up, which is 0.102 millimeters on my kit, and that does not fit. So that valve's actually in spec. Alright, now we're ready to change our shims, but first we're going to have to realign our RT mark with the two camshaft notches facing towards each other to adjust our right-hand exhaust, our right-hand intake, and our left-hand intake valves. Before we start removing valves, take a rag and place it down inside the engine so you don't drop any of the shims into the oil galley. Rotate the valve shim buckets so you're able to access the notch to remove the shim. On our one with no clearance here, the bucket still spins freely, so that's a good sign. It shows there's still clearance. On our one back here, the bucket has a lot of resistance to moving. That means that this was pretty close to having a valve stuck open. To remove the old shims, I'm going to use the Suzuki valve shim tool to press down on the valve shim bucket, a screwdriver to pop the shim up, and a magnet to pull the shim out. First, insert the tool and press down on the valve shim bucket. This may take a couple tries, sometimes it pops out there. Next, you want to use your screwdriver to pop up the shim. There's going to be resistance from the oil. It might take a little force to overcome. And once the shim pops up, if you stick your screwdriver under, it can't fall back down. And use your magnet to pull out the shim. With the valve shim removed, gently release the bucket and repeat the procedure for any other shims that need to be changed. Now that we've measured our valve clearances and removed our valve shims, we can calculate what size shims we need to change our clearances. Here's one of the shims we removed. You can see it has 280 written on it. When you put your new shims in, if you face them down, the camshaft won't wear away the number. If you have shims that were put upside down, you probably can't read the number. To check them, use a micrometer. And you can see that one, 279, 280. So using the dimensions of our shims and the gaps we measured, we can figure out what size we need to put back in. So on our right exhaust, our measurement was a little less than 0.03 millimeters. It had a 2.80 millimeter shim in it. We want to get to about a 0.10 gap because we're going to run our exhaust valves a little bit loose. So we'll subtract our 0.03 measurement from our 0.10 millimeters, and that gives us a 0.07 difference. So if we take our 280 shim and then subtract the 0.07, that tells us we need a 2.73 size shim. The shims that are replacements come in 0.05 millimeter increments. So here we can try to use a 2.75 or a 2.70 and see what our clearance is. On the right intake, our gap was 0.03. The shim we took out was a 2.58. That's a factory shim because the aftermarket only come in the 0.05 increments. So the 0.03 from our desired 0.08 gap, we need to change that by 0.05 millimeters. So subtract 0.05 from 2.58 and you get 2.53. So there we'll use a 2.55 or a 2.50 shim. On our left intake, our gap was a little less than 0.03 because we couldn't get the feeler in there. So subtract 0.03 from our 0.08 measurement that we'd like to see. That gives us a 0.05. We had a 265 shim, subtract the 0.05 from the 265, and that one should clean up nicely with a 2.60 shim. After you've done your calculations, you're going to need replacement shims. This is a valve shim kit which includes many different sizes. If you're a casual owner, this is really overkill because it has many sizes you'll never use. Our biggest shim in here was a 2.80, which was already too small, so everything bigger than that is completely useless. On Suzuki shims, the diameter is 29.55 millimeters. Make sure you get the correct size because there are 29 millimeter shims used in Kawasaki's that will make a difference if you put them in the engine. After you've calculated your replacement shim sizes, it's time to install them. I've already pushed down this shim bucket with the tool. I'm going to insert the shim, make sure you're putting the number side down so you'll be able to read it next time. And you want to get it centered in the shim bucket before you release the tool. And slowly release. You'll see a whole bunch of oil push out. Now that all the replacement shims are installed, we can go ahead and pull this towel out of the engine. We want to recheck our clearances with the new shims installed, but before they do that, we have to rotate the engine a few times to push out any oil that's stuck underneath the shims that would affect our reading. With our new shims installed and all the oil squeezed out, we're going to double check our readings, make sure everything's in spec. We should be good to go. Now that everything's back in spec, we're ready to reassemble. Start by cleaning up any old gasket material that's left on the engine. There's usually RTV here on all the little cam cap corners. Install your gasket into the cylinder head. You're going to place a little bit of liquid gasket in all these half moons here to make sure the gasket seals properly. Reinstall your cylinder head cover. The longer end of it faces the front of the bike. Try not to knock your gasket off as you feed it through the frame. Once you get the head back into place, check and make sure you didn't knock the gasket loose. If you did, just fit it right back into the correct spot on the head. When you're sure your gasket's properly placed, push down on the head cover to seat it. With our cylinder head cover properly seated, it's time to reinstall the cylinder head cover bolts. If you look at this bolt here, it has a gasket sticking to it where this one does not. Pay attention because the gaskets may have stuck into the cylinder head or they may have stuck to the bolts. You just want to get them back in the right place. The 4 shorter bolts go here and the 2 longer bolts go on the end. These shorter ones are actually screwing into the cam cap, so you want to be careful not to over torque them when you tighten them. Once you got your bolts finger tight, you want to go ahead and tighten them down. This is a really low torque application, like 11 foot-pounds. I find it too hard to get a torque wrench into the frame, so I just take the bolt down until it seats and then go slightly farther. You want to work in a crisscross manner to make sure you seat the gasket properly. Reinstall the breather cover. Make sure your breather element's in the correct spot. And tighten it down. Reinstall the 3/7mm bolts on your side cover. Reinstall your spark plugs. If your plugs are old and worn out, this would be a good time to replace them. Reinstall the tube from your breather to the airbox. Reinstall the components of the pair system. Once everything's installed, you can lower your gas tank onto the frame. Make sure you run the fuel lines and the vent tubing so they don't get pinched. Route your vacuum hoses and the fuel lines through the frame. Be very careful not to pinch them. Reattach your fuel lines from the gas tank to the petcock. The longer nipple on the gas tank is labeled with an R, that's your reserve, which will run to the farther back nipple labeled reserve on the frame petcock. With all our hoses installed, bolt the petcock back into the frame. Turn the fuel tank petcock back on. When the slot faces straight down, that is on. With all the fuel lines installed and the petcocks turned on, slide the gas tank into position and reinstall the 2 12mm bolts. Reinstall the fairings. Reinstall the seat. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. For more great GS information, visit gstwin.com.